Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. How are you, everyone? I believe that everyone is in good shape and in good health, sound and shape. Alhamdulillah. Today, we are we are going to discuss about the principle of language curriculum development. We are now in chapter 4, the principles. This is divided into two parts. The first part will be uh, on content and sequencing, and the second part will be on format and presentation and monitoring and assessment. Okay, the aim of this presentation, the session is that you'll be able to understand and decide later on principle that might help you to develop the course in order that the learning can be motivating and encouraging the learners to master the language. Pedagogically speaking, this principle will show you the sensible basis to guide teaching and also to help in design the course. So pay attention to all these principles because they are all important, of course, to be applied when you develop your course. First of all, we'll come to the content and sequencing. For these three parts, content and sequencing, and then format and presentation, and the third part is the monitoring and assessment. In content and sequencing, we have 8 principles. They are frequency, strategies and autonomy, space, retrieve, language system, keep moving forward, teachability, language burden, learning burden, and interference. And the 2 other sessions, the format and presentation, we have 10 principles, and in monitoring and assessment, we have 2 principles. Now, first of all, we are going to discuss about the principle in content and sequencing. First of all is about frequency. Here in the principle is that we have to consider about the items that should be covered in the course. The most important consideration is about the frequency. If they are really frequency items used in the daily life, for example, that means that they are really the important items, whether it is the structure of the language or the vocabulary of the language. If they are frequently used, of course, they will be considered as the important one to be included. The second one is strategies and autonomy. The language course should train the learners in how to learn the language and how to monitor and be aware of their own learning so that they become effective and independent language learners. We really want our learners of English as a foreign language in our area to be independent language learners, to be autonomous. We believe that if they are able to independently learn the language, they can improve faster. They can master the language better. And we have to include this principle. The third one is space retrieval. So learners should have increasingly spaced repeated opportunities to retrieve and give attention to wanted items in a variety of contexts. We will discuss further about this in detail in a moment. And the next one is language item. The language focus of a course needs to be on the generalizable features of the language. So the selection of the language items that should be included in the course. The principle number 5, keep moving forward. So a language course should progressively cover useful language items, skill, and strategies. So they should progress, for example, from the simple one to the next more complicated one, and how we select the kind of language items. And then next one is teachability. So the teaching of the language items should take account of the most favorable sequencing of these items and should take account of when the learners are most ready to learn them. So the selection of the item should be sequenced in such a way that the learners can use the previous items to learn the new item. So they will build up their knowledge and mastery of the language based on the previous knowledge that they have learned. And then they will master another one, a new one. And then finally they will build up their skill in the language. And principle number 7, learning burden. The course should help learners to make the most effective use of the previous knowledge. So this is the what is the principle that should be taken into account based on, for example, Crescent's hypothesis I+1. And then the next one would be interference. The item in a language course should be sequenced so that items which are learned together have positive effect on each other for learning, and there is no interference among them. So one item, when it is taught all together with another item, should complement one another, should support one another, not interfere one another. So that is the principle number 8 in content and sequencing. So now let's talk more detail about each of these principles. The principle number 1, the language course should provide the best possible coverage of language in use through the inclusion of items that occur frequently in the language so that learners get the best return for their learning effort. So a small number of high frequency items will cover a large proportion of the text. So because they are highly frequent use in, for example, in the daily conversation or when they are reading text, they will find the vocabulary words more often. Then we should include those kind of items in our course. And then we should also remember the low frequency items, even though they are not frequently seen in the text, but they are important in order they can understand the text that they are reading, and probably they will also use the item even though they do not use the item frequently in their daily, for example, interaction with others in conversation, for example. And typically, high frequency items are simple in their form. If you are talking about vocabulary words, the most frequently used words in daily conversation are those which are very simple, but not necessarily simple in their meaning. For example, if you are talking about the word sweet, this may have different meaning in different contexts. So every time you have different collocation, then the meaning may change. For example, you say sweet, probably normally you will talk about sweet in terms of taste. But then when you talk about diet, sweet may mean different kind of food or side dish. For example, chocolate cake, donuts, they are all sweets which are not good for our diet, for example. Or when you're talking about sweet home, sweet smile, sweet music, so of course they will refer to different meaning. So it's very important to consider about the most frequently items occurring in our daily conversation, even though they are simple, but they may not necessarily simple in their meaning. This is the principle number 1. Now, principle number 2 is strategies and autonomy. A language course should train learners in how to learn a language so that they can become effective and independent language learners. So in relation to learner goals, the language learning process, the tasks, the learning strategies, reflection on learning, they they should be learned by the learners, or in other way, we should train the learners to use this strategy like reflection and learning. They should be able to reflect what they have learned on and what they do not learn effectively during the lesson, for example. And then finally, they'll become the autonomous learner, independent learners. They will be able to learn on their own in order to master the language. We may do not provide fully guidance exercises, but they may work on independent free exercises when they become autonomous learners. So that means that the more independent they are, the more likely that they will be learn on their own, and they will be able to master the language faster. Learning strategies, which is important, is what we call the deep processing of language and content. When they are learning vocabulary, when you are drilling the words, for example, they may be able to fluently pronounce the word correctly. By drilling them, they will automatically pronounce the word correctly and probably the meaning in Bahasa Indonesia after drilling them. But then it is not what we call the deep processing. If you ask them to develop their own way, how to remember the pronunciation, how to remember the meaning, the synonym, the antonym of the words, by, for example, using what we call mnemonic strategies, that they will be able to to understand, to master the word, and then they can store their understanding in their long-term memory if they develop their own mnemonic, for example. So they create their own way of how to master the words in terms of meaning, in terms of usage, and in terms of the word parts. So this kind of deep processing is very important in order that they finally become independent learners. Next, principle number three is space retrieval. So learners should have increasingly spaced, repeated opportunity to give attention to wanted items in a variety of contexts. So while we present the items in a variety of contexts, the item may also be present in different time of the lesson. In the beginning of the lesson, they do exercise on the item, and in the middle of the lesson, they may once again review and do exercise in different ways, and probably to the end of the lesson, they once again review the item, and then based on these repeated opportunities, then we believe that they will master the language item. So repetition is not only at one time, but at some other time. And then they have the opportunity to see the item, and then we believe that they can master the item more readily when they repeat it now in different time, not only in different contexts, but also in different time. And probably during the following lesson on the other week, then they see again the item, and then they try to to recall, and then review again the item, and finally they will really master the item. And then the principle number 4 is the language system. Of course, this is the important one because we are going to make selection of the items that we are going to focus on at different time during the course of the learners. For example, you are considering about the regular language features. Regularity in a language is the one which become the unique characteristic of language. For example, we say that that is the creative use of language. The suffix, for example, the suffix er, for example, read, reader, write, writer, challenge, challenger. So this regularity may become an important item because the learners will be able to create on their own when they know the regularity of the items, including the pronunciation. So they will pronounce, for example, the vowel as if it is spelled when they are followed by silent vowel. For example, make, a, make, take, hate, shake. They are pronounced similarly the same, exactly the same when they follow the same rule. So this may be important item because they will be able to, to extend their understanding of the regularity on their own. And then about the vocabulary, remember once again, the high frequency vocabulary will come first. So the one that will probably more frequently used in their daily conversation, in their daily communication, will come first, and then come the lower frequency word list. And then they have to learn the word parts in order to understand the meaning of the words, and they can extend their understanding to new words. When they find new words and contain the word parts that they already know, they may relate the meaning because they already know the word parts. And then the structure. So probably there are English grammar which is very rarely used. For example, the conditional sentence, the third type of, or type 3 of conditional sentence, which might be very rarely used in the daily conversation or in real life communication. And also in terms of the larger chunks of the language discourse, the topics, for example, what kind of topics might be included in our course. The rhetorical structure, the cohesive devices when they try to understand reading text. If they really understand the cohesive devices, they may understand the text better because they understand the cohesive devices, including their writing ability. Their writing ability will be much better if they master the cohesive devices. Here is an example of the meaning of sweet that I mentioned just now. So the underlying concept, sweet, probably the sweet taste, sweet music, sweet smile, and different kind of collocation of the word sweet, and will present underlying concept of meaning, which is different from one context to another. Next, we come to teachability as the principle number 6. The teaching of language items should take account of the most preferable sequencing of these items and should take account of when the learners are most effectively to learn them. So once again, the items should be able to be taught and the learner should be able to learn. One of the most important principle here in terms of teachability is the what is the number of items, number of new items that should be presented to the learners. Generally, we can accommodate the principle by creation, comprehensible input plus one item. So they already have some background knowledge, and then we add one new item, and we are sure that this new item, because only one, will be able to be processed and achieved because they already have some kind of background knowledge that will be used to process the new item. But do not add too much item as new items to be learned. And that will be unteachable. So once again, the what is the list of the structure, a new one that they will learn should always based on the ones that they already know. If you are considering the structure, for example, a lot of research studies have shown us the order of acquisition. So the type of structure that the learners acquire in sequentially what is time, the formulate ones will be the first one. For example, how are you? Nice to meet you. See you again. So these are the first item that the including the children of English as a first language, and also those who are learning English as second language or foreign language. This kind of words or formulate expression becomes the first one to achieve. And then comes down to the next, you can see. And then of course you can select which one will come first. So you from this table, you can select which one will come first. And then if you want to order based on this order of acquisition, of course you can do that. You can also select not really exactly the same order, but you don't come too far away from one to another. So do not select number 1 and then you go directly to number 12, for example. So because the order, the natural order is not that far. Okay, the next principle is learning burden. You know what we mean by burden. So the number of items that should be learned at one time of practices should be in what is small in number, so they can they can proceed well, they can progress in what is a very flexible way in order that they can master that item. So the course should help the learners to make the most effective use of the previous knowledge. So once again, the previous knowledge will be the basis for understanding the new item that we present to them. The aspect of language may include the pronunciation, grammar, vocabulary, and discourse. So when you try to, for example, present a topic on, for example, on sports, and you know that your students, the students already know or have background knowledge on football, for example, and then you present reading text on football, when they encounter a new vocabulary words in that text, they may be able to guess intelligently the meaning of the words because they already have background knowledge about football. So this is very important to consider about the learning burden, how we present the, for example, the text when they want to understand the text by reading them, and then they already have background knowledge. Or you try to, what is to have some kind of pre-reading activity which try to trigger their background knowledge or previous knowledge about the same topic. Now, the last principle on content and sequencing is interference. So here we believe that when we present more than one item at the same time or simultaneously, we want these items do not bother one another, do not interfere one another. So the first item should support the second item, and then the second item should also support the first item when you present the item all together at the same time or simultaneously. We try to avoid the interference effect when we present couple of items at the same time. For example, when you are presenting vocabulary exercises, you may want to consider whether you want to present at one time about the opposite, the synonym, the free associate, the meaning, the translation of the word at the same time. If you consider that the exercise about the opposite, the synonym, the definition, the description of the meaning, and the use of the word in context, in this translation of the word in their native language, for example, will not interfere one another, then you can present the exercise at the same time. If you consider that the item may interfere one another, then you may select which one can be presented simultaneously without any interference. Okay, so this is the last principle on content and sequencing, and then we will come to the second part of the lesson, but we will cut this presentation as the first part of this principle. And you will do some exercises first before we see the second part of this lesson. The exercise or the assignment is please select one principle that you consider most important out of the 10 of out of the 8 that we have discussed so far. So select, choose one principle from the 8 principle on content and sequencing, and then explain what is the principle is, what this principle means that you have selected, and then explain why it is important. So you may write your answer, your assignment in English or in Indonesian, and then you will be asked to upload, to submit your work later of the day, later today, or probably the deadline will be tomorrow. Okay, so this is the first part of the